Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees. Thanks for being here today. And a special thanks to Brittany Wood and the entire Okta team for making today's event happen. This afternoon, we're going to hear from our panelists and have a Q&A session, as well as answer some of our poll questions. So with that being said, before we begin, I just want to encourage all of the audience at home to please submit questions in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll do our best to get to all of them, and also answer any of the poll questions that come up throughout the discussion. There'll be 3 of them that will ensure that you receive your CPE credit today. With all of that said, now I'd like to welcome our panelists to please come on camera and come off mute, because we're going to begin with a round of introductions. So let's start with Sean, because I saw him off first. So Sean, share with us who you are, what company you're with, and what you do at your company.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Sean Frazier, Federal CSO at Okta. It's a fancy title for a person responsible for federal programs here at Okta. So our moderate environment, FedRAMP high environment, as well as our DoD Impact Level 4 environment. So happy to be here. And Kirsten, always good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too. Mark, let's hear from you next, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Henderson. I work for the Internal Revenue Service. The group that I work for is under cybersecurity. It's got online fraud detection and prevention. We monitor phishing at irs.gov.
Thank you. Over to you, Jane.
Hello, everyone. I am the Chief Enterprise Architect and the Director of the Architecture and Transformation Division for the Office of Inspector General for HHS.
Fantastic.
Long title.
Drew, go for it.
This is Drew Malloy. I am the Technical Director for the Cybersecurity and Analytics Directorate here at the Defense Information Systems Agency.
Excellent. So in no particular order necessarily, Mark, how about we start with you? And I want to hear from all of our panelists on this. Mark, what has your agency done to ensure that employees are not falling for phishing scams?
So one of the things that we're going to talk about internally at the IRS, IRS employees, the IRS follows FSMA. So we have a whole suite of security education and training awareness that we do for employees. But if you're talking externally about taxpayers and tax preparers, we have a wide range of offerings, as well as we have social media that does outreach. We have communications and liaison, media relations that issue press releases and tax tips. And then on our website, sites like Report Phishing and the Dirty Dozen give taxpayers and tax preparers and businesses resources to make sure that they're not falling victim to phishing scams.
Thanks, Mark. Drew, what about over at DISA? What has your agency been doing to ensure that employees are not falling for phishing scams?
So we have a pretty comprehensive approach within the DoD. Of course, training is core to what we do. We have annual training and refresher training to make sure that everyone abides by it. But some of the technical implementations we do on the back end is a lot of email gateways and filtering to make sure that we can at least start to filter out some of the bad or malicious content before it even gets to the employee. So we have a number of devices at our gateways that will filter email and will look at links and provide risk scores for those links. And if they fall below a certain reputation threshold, we will not deliver that mail. So trying to be proactive and get ahead of it from a technical perspective, but also looking at the training element to make sure that they don't click on those links. Once they have those links, we also what we call neuter the links. We don't make them clickable. We don't make it so you can have a click here and behind it have a malicious link, so that our users don't fall for that and they end up having to actually look at the link that they're putting in the browser. And then finally, we have what we call cloud-based internet isolation, essentially taking all non-mission traffic, internet browsing traffic, off of our networks and doing it in virtual instances off-prem. And so that isolates that internet traffic from reaching our networks to keep the malicious content away. So it's really more of a defense in depth approach for how we approach the phishing vector. Excellent,
thank you. Jane, I'd love to hear from you next.
So for us, we also have a training program internally, robust training. People have to take their annual cybersecurity training. There are exercises that are done that we request employees to try to identify a practice phishing email. And then we keep track of those statistics over time to make sure to see, how successful we're doing with all of our training efforts. Our email boxes also have a little button on them to make it easier for our staff to report suspected phishing emails as well. And it will tell you if you are a part of an exercise too right away. So you will have known if you have identified something that was a test on our part. It's actually a little fish too in the email box. So it's pretty easy not to miss it, which is helpful. Like the IRS, we also have an external component as well. So the Office of Inspector General for HHS, we have the hotline for people to report Medicare and Medicaid fraud. HHS is one of the largest grant organizations I think in the world. And with that in mind, there's a lot of grant fraud. We've all seen the commercials or the emails or gotten the things about, hey, there's a grant fraud out there. We're going to give you money if you do A, B, and C. And so we often have a lot of customer alerts or social media efforts around trying to educate the public to not fall for those scams. We will not call you and just give you money. And so we get a lot of that as well. So.
Great, thank you. And Sean, would love to hear from the industry perspective, any insight you can offer on this topic.
Sure. And I live in the security organization inside Okta, and we deal with this as part of this organization as well. And a lot of good comments across the board from Mark, Jane, and Drew. And I think it is, you look at security, all aspects of security, including this one as a team sport, and certainly users are part of the team. So you want to make sure that they're vigilant. It's unrealistic to think that users will never click on a link because we live on the internet, which is full of links. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. But users can be more self-aware about where the links are coming from, where emails are coming from, diagnosing, kind of making sure it's legitimate versus illegitimate. But I think the other piece is it's incumbent upon us as practitioners to make sure we provide adequate tools for users as well. So if they do happen to click on a link, make sure that they have multi-factor authentication enabled for all their accounts, so that the link doesn't become as effective for the threat actor as it could potentially be.
Absolutely. We have a question from V. Andruni saying that the FTC reported an increase in government phone-based impersonation scams, and CMS and IRS are in the top 5 spoofing enterprise numbers to fool people. So other than notices, is there anything else that's being done to prevent this from happening?
Would you like me to answer that first, or ladies first? Is it anybody else? I can take it first if you like.
Go ahead, Mark.
Go for it.
Sure. So this is interesting because in 2019, FTC observed SSA overtake in April of 2019 the IRS as far as the number of government impersonation calls. So we haven't observed the volume that we observed starting in 2013 and continuing into 2016 and 2017, a high number of government impersonation using the IRS. That's not to say that we don't see it anymore. It's just, we just don't see the volume that we once did. Really, I think SSA kind of leads the government agencies that are being impersonated. So to answer your question, we typically have an intake, which is phishing@irs.gov, where people can report telephone numbers. If they're linked to a scam, we'll work with different partners, wholesale DID providers, direct inward dialing providers, and their resellers to disrupt that activity where it gets onto their network. We'll also work with large NSPs, network service providers, such as AT&T and others, to do traceback if necessary. And then for anything that is tied to a lot of what we see now are robocalls and similar related to services for tax debt and tax resolution, which we treat the same way. Taxpayers don't want those unsolicited communications, so we'll report those and then pass that information back out. We work closely with robocall blocking providers and also carriers to address those particular numbers. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mark. Jane?
And my answer is going to be somewhat similar. You know, I am in the IT department, so we don't necessarily do any of the investigations, but we do have an investigative department that does, you know, keep an eye on the volume and what is coming in, and you know, determines what to handle and, you know, the proper government agencies to work with. And I'm sure CMS themselves has a robust way of trying to handle all of this. The biggest place where we can make a difference is the outreach and the education and doing what we can to educate you know, our stakeholders, our public stakeholders, the taxpayers, Medicare recipients, Medicaid recipients on, you know, please don't fall for these scams. And they've gotten much more sophisticated than phone calls these days. I'm sure everyone here has had the experience of getting, you know, click on this link to Walmart and it looks like a real Walmart website. It's not. And even trying to kind of get over those humps and hurdles and educate folks about the difference is really, it's a big step and a big task. And it's something that we're going to be working on for many, many years to come, I suspect.
Absolutely. And that segues pretty nice into my next question, which Drew, maybe you can kick us off for this one, but what are some of the steps that you should follow if you have been scammed by a phisher?
So really the first step for us is reporting, right? Make sure that your security organization is aware that you've, you know, clicked on a link or suspect some sort of phishing attack that has occurred, and report that out and make sure that you quarantine your device, keep all the records, but quarantine the device to make sure that there's no lateral movement, and then really from there, it's working with the user, going back through training and making sure that those types of mistakes aren't made again is really the process that we have. You know, on the back end, there's a whole, and I encourage organizations as well to think through this, because there needs to be a whole remediation process on the back end as well that you need to work with your security and investigations team in order to set up so that they're ready and aware of when a phishing attempt happens. Here's what needs to be done. But those are really the sequential steps that we take when someone falls victim to a phishing attack.
Thanks, Drew. Mark, would you like to respond to that one?
Sure. Thank you. So as far as what the steps someone should follow if they're scammed by a phisher, if we're talking IRS, Treasury, or tax-related phishing scams, and you're a recipient of that scam, you can report it to phishing@irs.gov. Alternatively, you could also report it to other external organizations such as the Anti-Phishing Working Group. But if you're an actual victim or you've had losses or you've been a victim of tax-related identity theft, you should still report it to phishing@irs.gov. Report phishing on irs.gov gives you a lot of different resources on how to report it to us, because there's different types of scams. You should report it to the FTC, reportfraud.ftc.gov, or alternatively to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, ic3.gov. You should report it to the local police department. That just helps when you have a case for identity theft or tax-related identity theft. If you're a victim of IRS impersonation, where the IRS was used, you can report it to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, or TIGTA. They have a website where you can report it. And the last piece is, if you're a victim, whether you're an individual or a business, the IRS has a resource called Identity Theft Central. And if you go there, you can click on individual or you can click on business, and you can follow the steps related to that. I will highlight, in some cases, and just because we are seeing this, there are spear phishing scams, business email compromise, business email spoofing. One of those variants is the W-2 variant. And the W-2 scam variant's pretty straightforward. They just, you know, send an email lure that says, please send me all the W-2s. If your organization has fallen victim to that particular scam, there's a separate workflow and protocol for that. You would send it to dataloss@irs.gov. And then you would work with both IRS CI and another group within wage and investment to protect those employees.
Great, thank you, Mark. And Jane or Sean, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Jane, go ahead.
I think I would just only add to what Mark had to say. You know, we have a host of resources as well for identity theft related to the programs that are overseen by HHS OIG. I would just add medical identity theft as something for folks to, you know, keep an eye out for, as well as a separate, you know, don't give out your Medicare claims number kind of a situation. But if someone does get a hold of it, you know, please report it so that it can be handled appropriately. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, you know, again, a couple pieces to this. One is give folks the tools so that you can kind of blunt the effects of a phishing attempt by using phishing resistant factors of authentication. Now, that's a little easier said than done. We're getting a lot closer to that, but you know, we've been talking about this for 5-10 years because it's still effective for attackers to kind of come after this vector, because it's, you know, it's still pretty easy for them to do. And until we make it harder for them to do, they won't have to get too sophisticated and move up the sophistication curve for this, because we haven't made it super hard for them to do. The other piece, I think Mark and Jane and Drew all mentioned, the fact that certainly education and awareness and speed of reporting is important, making sure you're collaborating with your end users, give them that, you know, I think I've been phished button so they can very quickly report that. Make sure it's not punitive, because this is, again, one of the things we want to make sure that we're investing in a culture where the users want to participate in security. And if we make it too punitive and kind of come down hard on users, then they might be reluctant to report these things in the future. So we want to make sure we encourage them to report information, be collaborative with the solution, and also give them tools to prevent it from becoming worse than it could be.
Absolutely. And with that all being said, maybe each of you can give, you know, 1 or 2 insights into what are some of the key factors to actually identifying fraud. So what should people be looking for when it hits their inbox or whatever it may be? Mark, would you like to start on that one?
Sure, thank you. So I know CISA or CISA has a great infographic on them on phishing and what to look for. I really like what the National Cybersecurity Center has in the UK. And I just kind of rearranged what they have. So it's a handy acronym. So the first one is look for current events. So that's the C. And does this message leverage recent events? And we saw this a lot during the pandemic because of the third economic impact payment. And we saw specific phishing targeting the EIP. So right now we're seeing phishing that has increased due to tax season. The next part is look for authority. That's the A. So does the message claim to be someone official, like a government agency like the IRS or HHS or another agency? You want to make sure that you verify with that agency using the agency's resources versus the links or the numbers that you're provided or the email addresses that you're provided in the message. The third one is urgency. That's the U. Does the message state that you have a limited amount of time to respond or face penalties? A lot of times we will see phishing lures that will reference an account lockout, or they will say there will be some penalty that the person will have to pay a tax or a fee if they don't reply quickly. And then they're concerned that their tax record's impacted, they will not get their refund. So they click on the link or download the attachment. The fourth one is scarcity, or the S. Does this message often offer something that's in short supply? After a while, phishers could no longer use the economic impact payment lure because the Treasury stopped giving out impact payments. So they just switched to get my payment or getting a refund, in 2023. So stimulus payments, government grants, unemployment insurance fraud we saw with state workforce agencies is all very popular theme. And the last one is E for emotion. Does this message cause panic, fear, hope, or curiosity? If you're a taxpayer and you get an email that says you're entitled to, an extra refund, that's pretty cool. So you might want to click on the link, but just be aware that that is a very popular lure. We've observed that lure probably for 15 plus years, and to keep that in mind when looking at phishing emails.
Thank you, Mark. Anything else to add from the panelists or examples that you might want to share with our audience?
So I think Mark hit on a lot of good topics. I mean, my general rule of thumb, and I say this to my mom, because my mom's now on the internet doing all kinds of fun stuff, is that if it's unsolicited and unprompted, chances are it's not something you want to be involved in. If it's also too good to be true, it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So if anyone's offering you money or an extra refund or any of these different things, be skeptical. So I think, you know, my security background tells me skepticism is your best friend here.
Absolutely. Great point. Drew, did I see you come off mute?
Yeah, I think Sean kind of hit on it, right? Unless it's someone that you know, or it's something that you're expecting to come, treat it skeptically, right? And then when it comes to links, it really does help if you scrutinize a link, make sure that the root domain is actually where it says it's coming from. And if possible, if you can just navigate there yourself by just clicking on a link, it can be a little bit more painful, but it's a good practice to have to make sure that you don't incidentally fall victim to anything.
Absolutely. Jane, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think that we have provided a long, lengthy list of things for people to keep in their memories for the next time they get that unwanted or unsolicited text message or voicemail or email. So
That's right. Everyone be on the lookout. So that being said, our panelists, if you could please take a look at some of the questions that have come through from our audience. We're going to answer those in a moment. So just kind of review, see if there's anything that you would like to respond to. And I'm going to call for poll question number 1 in the meantime, while you guys review that. So poll question number 1, this is just for our audience at home, but please go ahead and respond to whether you have successfully deployed an identity solution within your organization or not. And we'll take a look at those responses when they're up on the screen. But all right, we've got a lot of Q&As coming through, so this is cool. Brian Seaborg asks, how are the 3 agencies doing identity proofing and for binding identity to a person for both B2B and B2C interactions? He's trying to see how identity management helps with avoiding fraudulent behavior. So if any of our panelists would like to respond to Brian's question, you can go ahead and come off mute. Mark, I see you off mute. Does that mean you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can. I was thinking of his. He has another question, but I hope the other panelists can speak directly to the B2B, B2C. But as far as identity management, avoiding fraudulent behavior, the IRS uses ID.me as their credential service provider, and they provide both identity verification and sign-in services for taxpayers to securely access IRS tools. So anyone with an existing ID.me account, such as from the Child Tax Credit Update Portal or from an ID.me that they use with another government agency, can sign in with their existing credentials. If they're a new user, they just need to provide a photo of their identity document with their driver's license, a state ID or passport as part of that identity verification process. They'll need to take a selfie with their smartphone or their computer with a webcam. Once they verify their identity, they can use that account across multiple IRS tools, which includes get your transcript online payment agreement, the Child Tax Care Credit Update Portal, and the Get Your Identity Protection PIN. And the reason this is so important is a lot of the attacks that we see, they know that all of these things are in place, that we are actively, trying to restrict their ability to get access to these accounts. So one of the things that they will do is they will just collect those credentials in the phishing site or just asking someone to provide that information, and then they can replay those credentials to potentially gain access to IRS resources or to potentially partners' resources. So having an ICAM solution in place that can verify the identity of an individual, that gives them multiple options. So in addition to text-based, they can also use an authenticator app on their phone. It makes it much more difficult. It adds a technical barrier that they have to go above in order for them to be able to perform fraud. In the service, it's called Stolen Identity Refund Fraud, or SIRF. So we're trying to limit their ability to be able to conduct SIRF. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
So
Sean?
I'll chime in and just to kind of touch on what Mark was saying. You know, there's two pieces of this. One is kind of the proofing of identity, prove who you are to validate yourself to get the credential to enroll. That's an important part of this. You know, one of the challenges that we had back in pandemic times when people were getting access to PPP loans and getting access to the Department of Labor unemployment benefits was that we didn't think of identity first when we opened up these services. And it's no one's fault. It was critical times. We had to roll these services out there. But I think it gets back to kind of thinking of identity first. Before I put something out there, make sure I have a strong identity, a strong proofing, and a strong system of management of that. After proofing, you can't just forget about proofing once proofing is done. You have to continuously validate what I consider, and I'll say it, and I'm going to cringe because everyone's going to cringe on this, but you got to have kind of a zero trust approach to this, where you've got never trust initially, never trust inherently, always verify. So you're always verifying that this is the same credential, that it's the same thing coming and accessing this piece of data. And that can be across the dimensions of the users, not only the users, but also devices. So in the enterprise world, you can have device trust signals that kind of say this is a more trustable request. But even in the consumer side, you could say, okay, if this person's device coming into the system is jailbroken, for example, I may not necessarily trust it to come in and make this request. And I'm going to have them go through and do another verification gaunt or another verification channel to make sure they prove they're exactly who they say they are. And all of that being said, we also have to balance that with end user experience, because it's great to put all these things in place and put all these roadblocks in front of users. But if we make it too hard for users, they either will choose not to play or complain or call the help desk or do all these different things that users tend to do. So that's the balance that we live in.
Thank you. Would any of our other panelists like to chime in here, or we'll move on to the next one? All right, so a provocative question. Okay, we like those. Given all the incidents in the past and present, should credit reporting companies be more regulated or their data be transferred to a government entity, such as the FTC could be the custodian of the credit reporting company due to data to facilitate security? Any thoughts from our panelists on this question from Richard Halliger?
Yeah, that is pretty provocative. So I'll be the first one to chime in. I don't know that the government would do that better than the reporting agencies, but I certainly take the point of the thing about cyber incidents and cyber events is we're all subject to this. Remember, I mentioned that security is a team sport and we all play and participate and work together. We can't shame the folks who have been exposed and had issues. And I look at all these things as learning experiences. I'm sure the credit agencies are much better at security than they were 5 years ago. We're all much better at security today than we were 5 years ago. So I think I'd rather have them support and focus on their security rigor and be good participants in this community of security, not necessarily pick that up wholesale and hand it to government. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Anyone else? Drew?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would agree, right? We've kind of lived through the OPM hack and really done a lot of the modernization of those systems and transferred that into the DoD. But at the same point, our data, I don't know how many times my data has been leaked, and I'm signed up for so many credit monitoring services for free that I've lost track at this point. It's really, moving the responsibility for the data doesn't necessarily protect it, right? The data is going to live everywhere. It's really also about the proactive monitoring of that data and making sure that you're on top of it to detect anything that fraudulently is happening as well, right? So I wouldn't say that it would solve the problem just by the government taking something like that over. I think it's really more about regulating a lot of what we're doing from a data protection perspective, and making sure we have those proactive steps in place for monitoring.
We'll go Jane and then Mark.
So I think I have similar thoughts as Drew. It's not going to go away just because we move it somewhere else. It's going to exist. And the credit reporting companies do more than just worry about security of the data. They have a lot of other roles they play in the industry as well. So I don't think it can be as easy as saying, let's just move it over here because of security and wipe our hands and it's all suddenly going to be fixed. And I think then it becomes just also an issue of resources. Is the government going to have enough resources to implement this across a very large and diverse nation and do it well, in addition to all of its other responsibilities, not just for security, but everything else. So I think there's a role here for both the government and the private sector to play in order to create that team of security experts that Sean has mentioned that we're going to need to have a good security posture.
Thank you, Jane. Go ahead, Mark.
I really like Jane's public-private partnership. One thing, and I want to avoid more regulation in my statement, but one thing that FTC does have is a complaint database called FTC Consumer Sentinel. So they receive reports just like the Internet Crime Complaint Center receives reports of incidents. So having these incidents is important because that can help drive potential change to do consumer protection. So if you have an organization report, the government can see that that report's in there, and then they can align resources to help that organization. But there's also the case where the organization doesn't know that they have been hacked or similar, and it's a user or somebody that uses that service that reports it, let's say, to the FTC or IC3. So having that ability to have those reports centralized and put in a format that law enforcement and others can use can really protect not only the individuals, but also businesses. So I like the idea of centralizing complaints with FTC. I don't know if FTC would be the right agency to do credit reporting, but I think just by collecting those complaints, they can really drive change as far as making sure credit reporting agencies are doing what they need to do to protect consumers.
Thanks, Mark. And this last audience question from Kapil, he asks, what protocols need to be considered in case of user impersonation or ransomware attacks? Do we have any public policy related to that?
So for us, we look at some of the email authentication protocols around DMARC and DKIM that if you fail that, if you fail that at our gateways, we do not deliver the message, right? And that keeps from domain spoofing and keeps a lot of those issues out. As far as there's DoD policy around it, public policy, I'm not aware of, but it is very much available features in many of the mail products that, commercial mail products that are out there.
Thanks, Drew.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll mention is I know that the National Cybersecurity Directorate under the White House is putting together the Cybersecurity Plan, and I think it's due any day now. So that'll be one good piece of public policy that'll talk about a lot of these different things. I think the other piece that's more rubber meets the road thing is reach out to your CISA counterparts. So CISA has regional folks that live in the regions and kind of enact this kind of detection, mitigation, reporting capability. So if you've unfortunately been hit by ransomware, your organization's hit by ransomware, or you think you might be, have some issues with your environment, they can come in and help. They're actually, again, regionally based. So they can come out in my area, in the Bay Area, California. They can come out in Alabama. They can consult with your organization, whether you be a small business or a medium-sized business or even a larger business, and they can kind of give you best practices and some of the CISA policies around, again, kind of detection, mitigation, and policies that you could put in place that they can kind of help you build. Because CISA's really put a pretty good library together for a lot of these things.
Yeah. Thank y'all. Any other comments here before I turn it back to my questions? Nope. Cool. All right. Well, we're actually going to pop up our second poll question then. So that'll be up on the screen momentarily. For the audience at home, are you currently using an identity authentication tool to mitigate digital fraud? Please go ahead and respond to that. So, Jane, I want to start with you. I don't think we started with you yet, but my next question is, how does your organization integrate ICAM, and what are some of the challenges that have come with ICAM integration?
So for us, I think I'll start with the challenge. I think the biggest challenge is data, managing employee data in a systemic and in a way that manages it across the organization. And over time, as we try to have more robust user profiles, it's how do you integrate that into all of our systems that we have. As we continue to mature in this area, I think that we will hopefully grow a little better in our concept of what counts as an identity. Identity isn't just your name and address anymore. We also, what computer, what device are you coming from? And there are a lot more of these requirements coming down from Zero Trust, and then for us, we're a smaller agency. How do we work that into our identity profiles and in a robust enough manner and so that we can keep it up to date so that we know when people are accessing it, who they are, what they're accessing, why, and all those principles that we think of when we come to ICAM. So thanks.
Mark, would you like to respond next?
Sure. So one of the challenges that come with ICAM for the Internal Revenue Service is simply volume. There's 130 million taxpayers, 6 million business taxpayers, 200 million tax returns a year, 1.5 billion information documents every year. So there's a lot of legacy, physical handling of documents. And we want to make sure that there is an ICAM that is put in place that provides service to a wide range of the public that also meets, federal privacy and security guidelines. I know by having the actual ICAM that we use now is called Secure Access Digital Identity, or SAIDI, and migrating to that should be relatively comfortable because taxpayers already likely use their phone to use their Face ID to access apps, and by setting that up, you'll be able to access a variety of different IRS services. So for us, in addition to volume, it's just providing something that everyone can use that's convenient and secure.
Thanks, Mark. Would any of our other panelists like to jump in and add anything? Sean?
Oh, sure. I got to say something about ICAM, not just because I work at Okta, but I believe that identity and access management, the control and the security of it really is critical infrastructure. There was a time many years ago where if you talk to kind of IT folks, they would say, okay, the identity system is just another database that people, it's their username, password, and it sits in front of this thing that they log into. And that's where it kind of got us to the place where every organization might have like 30 or 40 different ICAM systems, right? And part of, I think, what Jane's talking about is just the consolidation and modernization of that has been a big lift for most organizations. Absolutely. But there's a reason why it exists. If you look at, anyone kind of talks about security constructs, it's almost always the first thing. It's the first pillar in Zero Trust. It's the first thing people look at when they're starting to do security. And it has become more mature and more sophisticated in that it does take in other signals into identity. So it takes in things from device, it takes in behavior, it takes in all these different things that kind of says you are you as you're logging in, requesting access to something. So it's almost the most critical thing, and it changes a little bit depending on whether you're talking about my internal users that are my workforce versus my external users that are my customers. But a lot of the behaviors are the same. It's just kind of the levers you pull on how hard does it need to be, or how user performant does it need to be, or how transparent does it need to be. But it's still, again, one of the most important things you do from a cyber perspective. But oh, by the way, it affects all of your business because people have to do work and they got to log into things to do that.
Absolutely. And Drew, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think from the DoD's perspective, the challenge that we've really seen around ICAM, we've been doing this for quite a long time. Processes are very cumbersome, right? And we're trying to inject some automation into what we are doing. Unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where everyone kind of does things a little bit different when they provision things. And then, as Jane brought up, we're now looking at not only the identity of the user, we're looking at the identity of the device, right? And credentialing devices, servers, et cetera. And how do we tie those non-person entities to your persona, and then make access control decisions based off of that. And then how do we get a little bit more responsive and a little bit more agile in how we credential our folks? Because we do have very thorough processes to make sure that we have, you know, a lot of two-person control and positive validation, but a lot of times they aren't as responsive to need, and that's something that we need to try to modernize as well.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to what Drew's saying, because it's a good point, is that, you know, we've been doing ICAM for over 20 years. This is not new. This is not new to anything that we do in the public sector. What's new is trying to marry what we've done for the last 20 years to the modern technologies that we see that we're kind of, you know, our customers are forcing us to use, or they're using, and you know, whether it be modern technologies around endpoints, iPhones and iPads, or whether it be cloud services, because almost everything's a cloud service. Trying to figure out how do we take all the good lessons learned from the last 20 to 25 years and how do we apply that to modern. And that's really where the you know, kind of the crossroads of modernization around security and identity.
Muted. Okay. And speaking to that too, the next question I had is, how is fraud still occurring despite decades of security improvement? Could any of our panelists speak to what that?
I could take that one.
Go ahead, Jane.
So we're not the only people improving. You know, I'd like to think that there is going to be one key thing that, you know, makes it so that nobody can ever, you know, commit fraud. But, you know, just as we're improving in this area, so are all the folks committing fraud out there. So I think it's really more of a race to see who stays in front than it is it's going to suddenly come to an end someday if we just do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else?
Sure, I can chime in. So wasn't there a Yes song, Love Will Find a Way? And then Dr. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park said, life will find a way. Fraud will find a way, right? They will find a way to get in. And probably the easiest thing to think about is business email compromise, business email spoofing, which, you know, the FBI, sometimes called CEO impersonation. They would just pretend to be the organization, whether that was a email account that they took over. And this is why it's important not only to be skeptical about people that you don't know, but people that you know, and verify, you know, contact, context, and content of that request. But they would ask simple questions like, please, can you do a domestic wire? That was it. That was the whole approach. So people didn't think, they didn't have to have, you know, multiple links. They didn't have to do redirection. They didn't have to use all the different high-tech stuff that was out there. So when folks went high-tech, they went low-tech, to borrow from, you know, William Gibson. And that's what we see is really effective now. You know, some of the scams that the service deals with target specifically tax preparers. And they spearfish tax preparers using a scam that we call the new client scam. And the scam begins with what is called a bait fish. So that fish does not contain a malicious URL, does not contain an attachment. And any tax preparer that replies, whether it's positive or negative, they'll receive a malicious URL or attachment from the fisher. And then the idea is to land a remote access Trojan on that tax preparer. The next thing, you know, maybe to focus on too, why fraud, you know, hasn't, you know, why we still see it, is they've gotten very organized. Advanced fee fraud and romance scams, we see a lot of that out of Southeast Asia. You see a lot of articles now tied to pig butchering, which are investment scams where they have, you know, hundreds of people that are performing, in some cases that have been trafficked to defraud people of investments. With the BEC, BES scams and romance scams, that's been on the list for the FBI for the last few years as the top scam as far as the amount of money that's been lost. We see crimeware as a service. So just like you have, you know, platform as a service or software, you know, as a service or infrastructure as a service, fraudsters and organized groups, transnational criminal organizations have set up crimeware as a service, whether it's ransomware or DDoS or similar. And the last piece is things that were old are new again. Robocalls were, you know, in vogue for years. Well, now we have callback scams. They send a phishing email, and in that email is a telephone number, typically a toll-free number, that the individual is supposed to call back. When they call back, the person impersonates a government agency, a software vendor, or, you know, let's say probably most famously is probably Geek Squad, because FTC has an article on that. and then they walk them through the process to load software, remote access software like TeamViewer or similar, so that they can then get into their bank account to defraud them. So things like that are always going to be, available and improve over time, as Jane mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
So
you.
first of all, I love that Mark dropped a yes reference. As a yes fan, I wholly approve of that. The other kind of pop culture reference I always think about with this is, when they asked John Dillinger why he robs banks, he said, because that's where the money is. So the money's still here, right? This is still where the lowest hanging fruit for attackers to come in here. And as Jane pointed out, this is a business for them. You got to look at that. These are not kids sitting in their bedrooms hacking on things that used to happen back in the day. Still happens a little bit. These are organized crime. These are businesses. They have tools, as Mark said. They share their tools on the ultraweb, and they go say, okay, we've automated this, we've automated phishing, we've automated these different things, and they share the tools amongst each other, just like we do as partners in the real world. They share their tools, they share their best practices, they do all these different things. It's incumbent upon us to make it as hard as we can for them and increase their costs, because again, they're a business. They're doing things at low cost, high revenue. So we can increase their costs by reducing the low-hanging fruit like phishing scams and these other things, and kind of make them become more sophisticated. They're still going to be here. They're always going to be here. It's kind of what they do, but we make them work for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Comments from anyone else? All right.
Yeah, it's kind of, the question's really, you could ask, we've had centuries worth of policing. Why do we still have crime? Like, it's always going to be there, right? And that's just kind of something that we need to write in our mind to say, we're going to continuously up our game. They're going to continuously up theirs from an adversarial perspective. But it doesn't mean we need to be complacent, right? And have stasis in what we are trying to do. We need to continue to be vigilant. We need to put these things in place, but it's a constant game to where you're trying to reduce your risk profile as much as possible, but you have to make peace with the fact that you're never going to eliminate it, right? Even if you move to the latest and greatest, I feel like Sean brought it up earlier, so I feel like I'm allowed to say zero trusts now. Like, even people say move to zero trust and it fixes everything, it doesn't, right? So there's just the need to look at how do we secure our systems while also looking at the functionality of the systems and making sure from a DoD perspective, how do we continue to get the mission done, right? Because if we put in so many security controls that we can't execute the mission, either one, we failed, or two, they're going to work around it and probably in a not very secure way. So we just need to be mindful of security doesn't exist, just to lock everything down. We need to reduce risk, knowing that we're never going to eliminate risk.
Well said. Thank you, Drew. So I'm going to say last call for audience questions. If you have any audience questions, please send them in the next couple minutes or so. Otherwise, we might run out of time. And on that note, I'm going to call for poll question number 3. So this is our last poll question. If you're trying to get your CPE credit, please respond. Is your agency currently using any of the below identity authentication capabilities to mitigate fraud? Please select which ones. And for our panelists, this might be one of our last questions, unless we want to fit in a quick little audience one. But the question I want to pose is, why is ICAM modernization the premier defense against identity theft and fraud? Sean, I don't think we've started with you yet. Do you want to kick us off with that question?
Yeah, because identity is the front door. Nothing happens till something or somebody requests access to data. Full stop.
Mic drop. Thank you. Anyone else?
No, I mean, agree with Sean, right? It's the root of everything we do. Everything starts with identity, identifying the person who's trying to access the resources that we have. So for us, it's trying to look at end-to-end. How do we credential persons? How do we, personas? How do we credential non-person entities? And then how do we make sure along the entire access control chain that we have auditability of what it is they're doing? Because that is also key to say, all right, if in the case of, be it identity theft, be it insider threat, things like that, you want to be able to have the ability to go back and say, all right, what did this person have access to and where did they go within the network, to be able to do that that historical after action report to figure out what went wrong and what was actually exposed and or at risk.
Thank you, Drew. Mark or Jane, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I will say this is provided by someone that does ICAM, and then I'll follow that up with my own thoughts. So it's critical for agencies like the IRS to implement modernized identity and credential systems to keep fraud out. I think all the panelists would agree there. But it's also important for us to expand coverage to populations that have historically not been able to verify their identity digitally. And if we can continue to protect accounts with strong MFA options, including phishing-resistant MFA, we can have a better user experience and also achieve higher success rates for legitimate users. Primarily, one of the things that we see in phishing is the collection of credentials. And there are ways that people can do that. Phishers can ask you to provide the information to them on a phishing website. They can also install malware and collect the information from you. Or they can compromise someone and use the information they collect from that breach to then replay those credentials in what's called credential stuffing. So trafficking in credentials is common. So having something, where we can do identity proofing and make sure that the person that we're talking to is the right person is going to help reduce fraud.
Thanks, Mark. And Jane, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I think what I would add is, in the question, it's the concept of modernization. You can do it ICAM poorly, and it's not going to be the premier solution for fighting identity theft and fraud. So I really think it's important to take the time to plan it out properly and to really think through the strategy and not necessarily just rush into trying to get it done. Sometimes if we get in a hurry, we may skip steps that are really necessary to make sure it is that premier solution that the question referenced.
Excellent. Well, thank you.
The only other thing I'll add, because Mark brought it up about credentials kind of being out there in the wild, and they are, is that what is a credential? In most cases, in those instances, it's a username and a password. So the sooner that we can kill the password, and killing the password and going passwordless is kind of peas and carrots to a zero trust model and zero trust approach. The sooner we can get rid of passwords, the more we can make those credentials that live in the wild and the dark web useless.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, well, we are coming at the end of our webinar, so I want to end with just some key takeaways. What is it that you want to leave the audience with? That could be something that really stuck out to you as far as this conversation, or just any lasting words you want to provide. So we'll just go around, and I'll start with Mark, and you guys can't see my screen, but I'll let you know who's next. Mark, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Well, I've enjoyed talking to everybody today, or talking, maybe not to everyone, but seeing you. One of the things the IRS makes a concerted effort to make sure that taxpayers, tax preparers, and businesses have resources to deal with fraud. So if you haven't availed yourself to some of those resources, please check out irs.gov, whether it's Report Phishing or Identity Theft Central, and share those with your employees and your colleagues, because if you, unfortunately, if you ever become a victim, you might need, a good plan to recover. And I believe a lot of those resources could help you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And then Drew, you're next.
Yeah, I would just say from an organizational perspective to consider some of the technologies that we talked about today, both on kind of the email gateway side of the house, as well as having, a very mature process around ICAM, how you do credentialing, how you do multi-factor authentication, and from an end-to-end perspective, how you utilize that within your organization to include, some of the reporting and remediation you have to do on the back end. And then from a personal perspective, I would just say, maintain that vigilance, go that extra step. If you're not expecting something, an email from someone, treat it skeptically, and and try to take although it can sometimes be painful, sometimes take that extra step just to make sure that you don't wind up in this situation.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. And Jane?
So for me, I think I am always trying to make sure our culture includes security as part of what we do and not as an afterthought. And that is important even in the concepts of identity management. So whether you're building applications or providing access to your cloud environment, you need to think about the security around that. Who should have access? Why? Do we have the right technology? I think oftentimes, you know, if we get in a rush or we're not thinking it through clearly, it can, you know, you don't want security to go to the back seat. And we've been working on our culture to make sure that security is just part of our process. Your project plans should include those in its timelines. Your developers need to be thinking of security about it, you know, building a DevSecOps pipeline, not just a DevOps pipeline, you know, building all of your tools together and combining not just the ICAM, but into the whole security posture of the organization. So.
Excellent, thank you. And Sean, we will end with you, sir.
Yeah, I love what Jane just said, and that's kind of one of the things I want to make sure that it is emphasized is that it should be security by design across everything that gets built, gets done, and identity is a big part of that. Everything starts with identity, as we've discussed. So security by design is important to build into everything that you do. It's not necessarily easy because in a lot of cases we haven't done this for the last 20 or 30 years. So it's a little bit of retrofitting. We got to get to the mindset and the culture of it not being retrofitting and actually kind of be wrote in policy, in frameworks, everything that we do. And the other thing that's super important too is never forget about how important user experience is. As security people, we always think about the most secure thing is the best thing. But Drew mentioned earlier, if users can't use it, then there's really no point to it. So making sure that user experience and user frictionless access to them, you know, adding friction to attackers, not to users, making sure that's part of our mindset and our culture shift as well. So it really boils down to culture.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your time on this webinar. The hour went by really fast. And for those at home, thank you guys for participating and sending in questions. We love to have you join us. And of course, I need to thank our partners at Okta for making this all possible today. So thanks, everyone. And we hope to see you at the next event. It should be up on the screen here momentarily. On that note too, if you would like to have your CPE credit emailed to you, please respond to this last poll question. And our next webinar is DevOps Hurdles in 2023 and how to overcome them. So that'll be March 2nd at the same time, our Thursday weekly webinar series. So if you liked this content, you'll probably like that one. So please go ahead and register and hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Bye.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, everybody. Take care.